Tal. Good day, educators. Tim Ryan here. You may know me or may have had me in your class or know of my involvement in the past with PIR Day. It has been some years since I have participated. Much of my teaching philosophy is based around experiential learning. Besides lecture and demonstrating to the students, they get hands-on learning activities through the use of natural materials like plant fibers to make cordage, or to try starting a fire by friction, or just walking a trail and identifying the cultural flora and fauna. The following is a collection of videos that I've produced mostly on my own and have uploaded them to the students at the Salish Kootenai College, as our classes had to morph into online classes because of COVID issues. I start by introducing myself and my teaching philosophy, and then I present a natural world observation for the students, and that has to deal with deer, and you'll see that in the video. I start with showing our course syllabus, and I want to highlight in the syllabus the unique SKC's four C's, which are critical thinking, cultural awareness, citizenship, and communication. And the SKC's educational worldview on down on the syllabus. These are all aspects of my teachings, and you can pause the video and to read them on your own. The SKC mission statement is, the mission of the Salish Kootenai College is to provide quality post-secondary educational opportunities and support for Native Americans, locally and from throughout the United States, to achieve their academic and career goals. The college will perpetuate the cultures of the Salish, Kasanka, and Kalispé peoples. The college will impact its community through service and research. SKC's mission objectives are access and success, quality education, cultural perpetuation, research and service. I have to admit that I am an amateur at filming myself, and sometimes it sounds as though I'm reading off the script. Well, I am. And some of the sound on some of my outdoor videos may be a little bit windy and hard to understand. And finally, I want to thank the Confederate Salish Kootenai Tribes Educational Department and Salish Kootenai College Educational Department also for this opportunity to present to you our most vital and important educational contact with our children and young adults. Lem Lems Pasia. Tal, student. Good day. My name is Tim Ryan, and I am co-teacher with Dr. Michael Munson in the Integrated Perspectives in Science for Educators Part 3, and that'll be for spring quarter. I'm co-teaching with Michael because of my experiential learning methodologies. I have spent a lifetime out in the natural and wild lands of the Aboriginal territories of my tribes, the Salish, Kalispé, Kasanka tribes. I also have bloodlines through the Northern European tribes, the Irish, English, and Scottish people. And I want to say I'm proud of all those heritages, or all those races inside me. Diversity, multiculturalism, it's good, and it's something that I hope that as our classes are made up of different people, that we can share our stories and we can learn about culture and science and such. So a little bit about me. I was one of those individuals that tried to get out in the woods all the time. Most of my work experiences are out into the world, in the wild lands or natural lands of Montana or my Aboriginal territories. One thing I do is that I reconstruct the material culture of our tribes, or indigenous peoples in general, everything from stone tools onto fish traps, hide tanning and such. But not only the making of these materials, but the understanding of how our people lived traditionally on these landscapes, which I call a cultural landscape. And part of my teaching is a cultural landscape tour. and which might be a little bit difficult to do within the COVID-19 virus pandemic at this time. So this will be a new way of teaching for me, is online and through video production of my knowledge and such. But we hope to bring you an exceptional learning experiences and such. Hang with us this quarter with our online classes. I'm sure that you will learn a lot. You will learn a lot from me, and I'm excited to spend my time and to share my time with you. So, okay, let's get after it. Thanks. Okay, we have a few deer bedded down. You can see them right there. Might be a little hard to see, but they're actually chewing, or as I say, chewing their cud. And they're bed down. Okay, so student, let's go for a walk. It's kind of interesting. I've got this selfie stick, and so then it's going to help me to film me and where we're at and the environment we're in. But hopefully I don't stumble because I'm either looking at the camera and not the trail. So anyway, okay, so I come upon a natural feature here that I like exploring. Here, let's notice these depressions, and this is where the deer have been laying down. So these are like little day beds for the deer. Why I say day is because it's usually in the middle of the afternoon or something like that that they're here. And when I've had a chance to really watch what they're doing as they're sitting here, laying here, is that they're chewing. Their jaws are moving back and forth. And what I've heard is that they're ungulates, right? Ungulates mean they have a couple of different stomachs that they can process the grass through. And so during the day, they have to chew their cud. So essentially what they're doing is to help to digest the grasses and buds and twigs and things like that they eat, that woody material. Also, they need to regurgitate it through their throat, and then they re-chew their half-digested food and then swallow it again. So this is a very essential thing for the deer to do. They need to do that in order for proper digestion. Kind of a fun thing I used to do as a young boy is I used to come to these deer beds, and I'd crawl up in one of the deer beds and fall asleep and take a nap. So that's kind of an interesting little phenomenon there to think about, right? You know what that is, and that's something you can tell your friends and family about. But do that sometimes. Find a deer bed like that, crawl up in it, take a nap. Maybe you'll have deer dreams. Students, this is Tim Ryan here with Integrated Perspectives in Science for Educators, and we're going to talk about the seasonal round today. Okay, so all Indigenous peoples developed a body of knowledge called traditional ecological knowledge or Indigenous sciences. And this is a body of knowledge that was gathered from various different ecosystems that allowed them not only to survive, but to thrive over several thousands of years, carrying a group of people or a tribe for generations upon generations into the future. This traditional ecological knowledge provided for a deep understanding of how the natural world worked and the people's role within that natural world. This understanding is deep in spiritual connection. Then the seasonal rounds for travel for foods, resources, trade, relations, and ceremony embodies this knowledge, and this connection defines a group of people or a tribe as unique and individual from other tribes. Okay, so if we look at the seasonal round here, we see that it's quartered out into the winter, spring, summer, and fall quadrants, and then we have the Roman calendar months on the outside, and we have the Salish and Kootenai months on the inside. And as you can see, month of April, we're in the Buttercup month. Okay, so as we come down into this season round graphic, we have our wintering grounds, season round travel, and then back into from fall back into the winter time habitation, and then the different quadrants of hunting elk and deer, and then fishing, and then the generalized activities that would happen during those seasons. The season round is basically a graphic that represents time and place. It's a calendar of activities, and those activities have to take place at a certain place, a map, you would say. Okay, so then if we look at some of the political parts of this seasonal round, the Hellgate Treaty, of which the Salish, Kootenai, and Kasanka people reserved the right to hunt and fish in and gather in custom areas of Aboriginal lands. And these lands are represented within this seasonal round graphic. The history and use and the tribe's presence upon the landscape is represented here, and this has also helped the tribe's fight for land claims and water rights. So if we look at the geographical cultural groups of the United States, so for example, all these tribes within these different areas have different seasonal rounds, and they're unique to each other. Coastal people, of course, they have the coast there with many riches, and then they into the Cascade Mountains, certain loops and such. But here in Montana, the Western Montana tribes, they would be interacting with the Plateau, Great Basin, and the Great Plains ecosystems. Okay, now if we go into the Aboriginal Trail Network of the Salish, Kasanka, and Kootenai people, we see that the seasonal rounds, they can be considered encompassing loops of travel through the varied landscapes of Aboriginal territory. These loops of trails were planned with resources in mind and how to efficiently and effectively gather and extract those resources at their peak time of availability and to gather them in a timely manner. The seasonal round was essential to the tribes for daily sustenance and for securing necessary quantities of food and materials for storage and future use during the winter months when resource availability was limited. And as you can see here, a quote by Tony Kashola, before the horse and the incursion of the Plains tribes into our territories, we had bands of people all through these mountains, from the Buffalo of the Missouri, Musselshell, and Yellowstone rivers to the east, and to the west we had the salmon beyond the Bitterroot Mountains. Then we go from the Sweetgrass Hills down to the Yellowstone country, and our people were there too. The Northern Rockies homelands of the western tribes abounded with fish, fowl, deer, elk, moose, and bear. The region is characterized by a myriad of protein sources with no exclusive critical source like that found on the Buffalo Range to the east or salmon fisheries to the west. Adding to that diversity, natural and human-caused fire influenced forest mosaics that produce vast amounts of roots and berry foods, important items for use for trade. Through the movements of the North American and Pacific tectonic plates, along with other geological activities, major stone quarry materials of chert, quartzite, dacite, and basalt became available within this region in the geological age. And as you can see, we have salmon on the coast and the bison of the plains there, and within the middle, the tectonic plates exposed lithic or stone tool material, like you see in the photo. In my hand there, I have some chert material used for stone tool making. Okay, so on this, if we look at the basic food groups, on the seasonal round, you got your fruits, which were represented by the berries. Your vegetables were the roots, and then you had the fish, your meats, fish, fowl, and that was your proteins. And then other important foods along the way were the seeds, pine nuts, cambium, sap, pitch, and lichens. So traditional ecological knowledge was very important for the success of the seasonal round. And within this traditional ecological knowledge, we find the technologies like the digging stick here, represented by there, as being a very important part of that traditional ecological knowledge. And then we get into the cultural bioindicators, which were part of the seasonal round also. Sometimes it was an indicator of when to start your seasonal round. So one fine example of this is of a bioindicator is when the larch trees in the mountains there start to turn yellow, the leaves or the needles start turning yellow, then that means that the bull trout are getting ready to spawn, or they are spawning now, and that you're to get your fishing gear ready. Okay, so the seasonality of the tribe's movement had to be calculated to have the necessary resources available at the right time and place along the entire route. Seasonal travel required that economic resources be available and in adequate quantities to sustain the group and provide sufficient resources to engage in trade with others. Food resources were not the only concern. Medicinal plants, minerals, pigments for paint, plants and animals used for tools and equipment were also very important considerations. Stone tool material was absolutely essential for the technology in the pre-contact days, and the location of the quarries was also vital to the seasonal round. The Aboriginal Trail Network was the highways, roads, and paths to the resources of foods, construction materials, medicines, teas, trade, relations, and ceremony. Being on the trail is not only work, but also an adventure and a welcome release from the winter internment of the teepee living. Limited space, subdued activity. Also, this seasonal activity gave an opportunity to pass on traditional knowledge to the younger generations, ensuring the tribe's future success. The seasonal round was also designed to connect distant families and relatives for trade, ceremony, and spiritual connection. From high peaks used for vision quests to healing hot springs in the lowlands, these special places were critical components of the course traveled and camp locations used throughout the seasonal round. The seasonal rounds of western Montana tribes was quickly altered with the introduction of the horse to western Montana in the early 1600s. During the pre-horse or dog days, the seasonal rounds or loops were limited distance and concentrated around major sources of food and material resources in a more localized region. The reliance of other bands adjacent to them was important for trade and resources that might not be within distance, like that of lithic materials, specific roots, or medicines, for example. The dog days may have also fostered the specialization in certain resource extraction, preparation, and construction of material goods and tools. A person living close to a vital resource like that of a chert quarry could lead to expert craftsmanship and trade in that material resource. The arrival of the horse brought a major change to the seasonal round patterns, greatly expanding the Aboriginal territories. During the horse days, many people feel that cutting out the middleman and going directly to the source because of mobility is in their best interest. Use of the horse afforded a greater distance of travel and an increased capacity to carry gear and food for extended outings. It also resulted in shifting Aboriginal territorial boundaries and the inherent warfare that resulted from this change. Okay, so much of this information that I have shared with you have come from a paper that I helped to write with a friend of mine, Dave Schwab, an archaeologist that I worked with when I worked for the tribe doing cultural preservation work. And you'll find this. It is the seasonal rounds of the Intermountain tribes. And this paper will be listed on Schoology. Okay, one more thing. So, what do you think of your personal seasonal round? And what trails do you travel? This may be an exercise or an assignment in observation and reflection of your own livelihood. Okay, that's it. Shea hoy. Students, I'll talk to you down the road. Thank you. Ches tatal, students. This video is on the subject of ethnobotany. So let's look at the definition of ethnobotany. It is the plant knowledge and culture of indigenous peoples. It is a major part of the extensive traditional ecological knowledge essential for a successful seasonal round. It is also part of these three groupings of resources, and that would be plant, animal, and mineral. If we look at the seasonal round graphic, we are in the month of the buttercup, as you can see there, as per the Salish and Kalispe culture. So what does this mean? The buttercup isn't a major resource, but what its importance is that it signifies the beginning of spring, which is one of the first plants to bloom and is a true sign of better weather to come. So when our ancestors observed the buttercup bloom, they will think of spring, and in turn that tells them that the cutthroat trout will be spawning and that they should get their fishing gear ready here soon. So the buttercup is a bioindicator of time or seasonality and indicator of the time to fish the cutthroat trout during its spawn. And there are places you need to travel to conduct your fishing. Thus, the seasonal round represents time and place. We see in this seasonal round calendar that spring, summer, and fall are major seasons of plant harvest. In general, the spring brings roots, shoots, summer brings berries, teas, medicines, and fall brings bulrush, cattail, dogbane, and woody materials for bows and digging sticks and other tools. And in the winter, you would be making plant-based items like mats, baskets, and tools from the plants harvested from the previous seasonal round. Woody construction plants like lodgepole pine for teepee poles and tree bark items are harvested in the spring for easy removal of bark that's caused from high moisture content. Some woody plants were harvested in the winter when the woody material contained the least amount of moisture for preference and processing. The serviceberry, which you see here blooming, the serviceberry bloom in spring is a bioindicator that means the bitterroot is ready to be harvested. So let's remember too that activities indicated on this seasonal round here are activities that take place where those resources are. So the bitterroot will require travel. Bitterroot does not grow everywhere, and those areas that support seasonal round harvest by large groups of people was considered a very important essential place that supports the tribe's livelihood and connection to that plant. This brings up a very interesting sociological aspect of the seasonal round. The indigenous peoples protest against environmental impacts to their Aboriginal territories are not only impacting that land, but it's impacting their seasonal round, their traditional seasonal round, um, and it's an assault on the culture of the indigenous peoples. Take, for example, the Keystone Pipeline. That pipeline was not on the reservation, but it was on still Aboriginal territories of those people of the Dakotas. and most likely it was influencing certain resources that they incorporated on in their seasonal round. Okay, so indigenous people had a great influence on the land, and those influences changed the landscape and created a cultural landscape. A cultural landscape that we can still see today, but is rapidly disappearing by the dominant society that has restricted fire on the land, has created monocultures of plants through overharvest and grazing animals, over harvesting the grasses, and causing ecosystem failures in general. Indigenous peoples learned to use fire as a management tool for them to maximize the carrying capacity of their Aboriginal territories, the areas that they were accustomed to, that their seasonal round traveled through. This also assured more successful seasonal round activities and the success of the tribes to carry on for future generations. The use of fire helped to diversify the plants in the many ecosystems used by the seasonal round travel by creating a mosaic of vegetation zones and increasing diversity. A landscape plant cover was formed having open areas and vegetated areas that both plant and animals benefited from. The open grassland would attract grazers, and the animals of prey had vegetation cover to ambush the grazers. Also, one hunting strategy was to burn off the grass of a meadow in the late fall, and that in turn stimulated the growth of grasses and attracted deer, elk, and bison to feed on the new spring grasses. The hunters then came back to the meadow in the spring to hunt the grazers. Okay, as you can see, the old growth ponderosa pine stand here that was created by our tribes in the seasonal round. Okay, fires also help promote old growth forest stands by regularly burning the understory of vegetation. Many large diameter trees have adapted to fire, which created a cleared grassy forest floor with the large trees sheltering the Salish and Kalispe in their camps. And kind of an interesting little note here with this slide here is that this is an Edward Curtis photo that was created during the turn of the century when he was doing his photo essays on tribes throughout the United States. And then on to the right here, you'll see F.N. Wilson was a illustrator. He illustrated this image, this photographic image, into what we see here and entitled it The Camp of the Salish. And as you can see, it was probably the missions back there, and this is the Flathead River at this point here. So you can see how these large old growth ponderosa stands and such support a sheltered camp. Okay, huckleberries and huckleberry baskets here, as we see the management of fire helped to enhance the huckleberry. Fire is what made the old growth trees that we see today, though these old growth forest stands are limited these days. Old growth large for because of the fire issue, fire restriction, it has caused an understory to build up underneath the old growth forests, and now they're in danger of burning up. That was the regular practice of our tribes, and they cleared the understory of those old growth stands. There's an old growth larch stand in the Swan Valley, just over the Mission Mountains from where we're at here at the college. And this old growth larch stand has been studied for fire effects. And through the process of their tree ring study, they calculated a fire every 25 years. This was not a natural fire pattern, and they concluded it was fires caused by the Salish and Kalispe tribes setting fire to the land in this place every 25 years. This fire practice was most likely used to invigorate huckleberry, as huckleberry grounds can get overgrown with trees, with tree cover, and fire helps to open the forest canopy for berry growth. The Swan Valley has always been considered a major area for berry gathering by our elders and ancestors. Okay, the extensive traditional ecological knowledge of the tribes is vital for the seasonal round to be successful. One example of this knowledge is the seasonal transbiotic procurement strategy. The indigenous peoples of the Northern Rockies recognized the fact that the harvesting areas would have cyclical productivity. Areas containing abundant quantities of a particular resource such as bitterroot, one year may have low bitterroot productivity in the next. The sending of small scouting parties to different traditional areas early in the seasonal cycle provided necessary intelligence to inform the larger group's annual migration pattern. Thus, the planning and strategies employed to coordinate the seasonal round required generational knowledge and experience on an annual basis, and the flexibility to alter planned movements as conditions changed. This may also account for the adaptability to climate change and other environmental factors that indigenous peoples have experienced for generations. The majority of resources harvested by indigenous peoples come from the three categories of plant, animal, and mineral. And in our development as human beings millions of years ago, plants are the first and foremost resource to be manipulated and used to sustain life. Indigenous peoples have used hundreds of different plants for food, medicine, materials, and in ceremony. The deep connection that the Salish have with the bitterroot is explained by Felicity MacDonald in this story. When I worked in the CSKT Tribal Preservation Department, I was involved with some elders with elder interviews on plants in the Camas area, and we were looking at some bitterroots. And it was an area that didn't have many bitterroot plants, and Felicity MacDonald was standing near me, and she said to me, "We should be working with this bitterroot here. We should come back and dig here." I looked at the plants and I said, "There's not very many bitterroots here. Would this patch be able to handle it?" And Felicity says, "Oh yes, if we're gentle, it will grow, and eventually there will be a big patch, and it will get really thick with bitterroots." I was truly perplexed and had to ask how that would work. Felicity says, "Okay, first off, the bitterroot is our friend and family. It needs acknowledgement and honoring by us. And I think this small patch is lonely." And so then let's look at this too. And you see these 4 bitterroot plants here? You should only take the biggest one and leave the other 3 plants here. When we use our digging stick, the petsa, to get the bitterroot out, it leaves a small hole and loose soil for the bitterroot seeds, water, and nutrients to go into the ground and to help seed and to help feed the other bitterroots near the one you dug up. And so they will grow, and there will be a lot more of them here. After that conversation with her, it gave me a deeper understanding of my ancestors' relationship with plants. One personal story that I have is with willow. I studied traditional fishing methods and talked to my elders on this subject, and the willow fish trap was mentioned many times. So I studied the construction of a trap and spent a few weeks making my cordage to tie the trap together. Then I went to the river and collected the willow, came back home and started to tie the willows together, and in a few days I had a fish trap that I was very proud of. But in 2 months, I started to notice all of my ties and bindings was coming loose, and in the 3rd month, the trap was just falling apart. This was very disappointing, and I spent a lot of time and effort on this. So I sat down with the trap, looking at it, and said, "What happened, fish trap?" And after a few minutes inspecting the trap, I observed the willow had changed form. When I first assembled the trap, the color and texture of the willow basically indicated to me that it had dried and shrunk. Therefore, my ties came loose. So I figured this out. Or did the willow communicate that to me? Did willow teach me how to work with it? Is this how the indigenous mind works and how they connected with the plants on a deeper level? So there is something to think about. Shehoy. Happy trails.
Ches tell, students. Tim Ryan again here with Integrated Perspectives in Science for Educators. We're going to do a little video on the spring roots, the first roots that come up. And one major indicator, even a bioindicator, is the balsam root, arrowleaf balsam root. Right there, I'll get the camera set up and we'll talk a little bit about the balsam root. Okay, so there's balsam root, and it's a bioindicator of lamb. Thank you for letting me share your bounty. Okay, one thing with the arrowleaf balsam root is these early flowers, you can strip the outside with your thumbnail. My nails are dirty from digging roots. And you can see you can slip. So I'm taking that outer skin from the inner core of the flower stem. Now the inner core is a bit like celery. You might be able to hear me kind of crunch on it a little bit. It's pretty good. Yeah. Favorite food right there. Kind of like I said, kind of tastes like celery. Okay. Now right next to it, right down below it, we have a biscuit root called macrocarpum. And it's Lomatium macrocarpum. It's a biscuit root. It's edible. And it's some of the biscuit roots are a bit more tastier or not as strong tasting as some of the other roots out there. So it was one that was pretty special, even for the first settlers that came into this area. Okay, we have another biscuit root or lomatium right next to this Lomatium macrocarpum, and we have a 9-leaf lomatium here, or a 9-leaf biscuit root. Dig that root up too, and you can eat that. A lot of times they're kind of strong tasting, but if you dry them out, cook them, they're a lot better tasting that way. Okay, so right up on this ridge, we have a wonderful array of traditional food and medicinal plants. And up here, we can start to see the little bitterroot plants coming up right there. One right there too. So we're going to find one here that we can dig and demonstrate. Up here, the ground is a little bit rocky, but we're going to demonstrate digging a bitterroot up. Okay, so there's the bitterroot we're going to dig up right there. See if I can position this camera somehow. Sorry about that. There's that bitterroot right there. Okay, so this is all a part of filming on your own. So we're going to go around this plant, and I'm going to loosen up the soil around the bitterroot. Because I want to get as much of that root as we can. Right? Okay. Pretty rocky ground too. So we'll see what kind of root we got here. Okay. There's our spatulum. Nice, look at that. Okay, so you can see that this is the kind of the succulent greenery there. This is the time that the plant would be harvested, because this outer sheath that shields the root, this can come off a lot easier at this time of the year, and it's at this development of the bitterroot. Okay, one thing you want to do, pull the top off, put it back in the hole, and all the sheath that's around the root, you want to put that all back in the hole that you just dug the root out of. Because what that'll do, it'll regrow. So I put that root back in there, that root will grow, and we'll have another bitterroot right there. So that's sustainability. That's the indigenous sciences, or the traditional ecological knowledge built around the bitterroot, and how you can sustainably harvest it and it'll grow. So if we come back here next year, we might have a bitterroot growing right there. Lamb lamps. Spatulum, lamb lamps. Appreciate your gifts that you give to us and fortify us.
Okay, students. One of our projects is the traditional digging sticks, or the Salish word for petsa, or for the digging stick is petsa, and this is a generalized root digging stick. So all roots were dug with a stick similar to this digging stick, and essentially what it is, it's a shaft of hardwood, and then a handle of hardwood, or sometimes the handle. A lot of times the handle is made of antler too. So. But for this class, we'll be making the handle and the shaft out of one piece of material. And that material would be this here. And this is Rocky Mountain maple. There's a lot of it out there. It's a semi-hard wood. It makes a good digging stick. And it's not too hard for the students to actually carve on and to manipulate. But we're going to go through, we can get our whole digging stick out of this one piece of maple here. So your handle will be more of the thicker part of this end here, and then the shaft will be down in this realm right here. Now you can see it's a little curved and a little wanky. You don't want a straight piece for your digging stick. You want a curve. You want some sort of this slight curve we have here. This is part of the physics of a digging stick. You need leverage, and leverage is part of this angle, or this slight curve of the shaft of the digging stick. As I relate it to as like a crowbar that levers the plants out of the ground. The crowbar has an angled foot, similar to this, and with this design of a digging stick, what that helps to do is that if my fingers are representing like bitterroot, like the roots that they're digging, and you push this stick in close to the roots, this curve is going to help to create that tip of the digging stick to curve in and underneath the roots so that it can be levered out that way. And there's a whole process, a best practice process of loosening up the soil around the plant, and then coming into the center, and then being able to lift that plant out of the ground. So in a leverage sense, this is your lever right here. The shaft is your lever, and the ground that you're digging into is then your fulcrum. And when you're digging in there, it is rotating on the ground and able to lift the plant basically out of the ground that way. So digging stick. Most all of them were made of hardwood, like serviceberry, hawthorn, ocean spray, mock orange, chokecherry. All those hardwoods are really good for a digging stick. And then you would use the same, the thicker end of your material that you're using for the handle on there. And then what we have here is elk rawhide. Elk rawhide, what we do is cut that in strips and then soak that in water. I'll just show you. Okay, here we are at the Finley Point State Park, and this is one of your STEM scavenger hunt areas. And what we got here is a little bit of history. Now the lake level, at historic levels, would come up to this point. But when the dam was put in the 1930s, that brought the lake up at a constant level to this level here. And what it's done is it has eroded away some landforms that were part of the lake shore here. So if we pan over this way, you'll see this flat area here. All this was land at one time, and there's some tree roots in there that prove that there was trees out there, probably some large old growth trees in that area, and that they're probably favored for some for a beautiful campsite here. Okay, so if we pan further back down this way, we'll come around and you'll see the islands out there. That's called the Narrows out there, where the islands are. And as we pan around here, we'll see that we have Polson is down there, the outlet of the lake is down there too. So the river continues to go pour out of the lake there, and which regulates the okay, so we come down to the shoreline, are these lake cobbles here, and you'll see a certain kind of pattern going on here. Through the wave action, they've actually laid the rocks out in a certain pattern. So I want you to observe that a little bit and think about how these patterns of these rocks were laid down. And you'll see that certain concentrations of rocks are laid at different areas too. So large cobbles versus small cobbles. You'll have sands and gravels and cobbles, large cobbles, even to some bigger rocks. If you look down the shoreline, you'll see some large rocks. Larger rocks, those could be called glacial erratics, and at one time they could have been floating encased in ice, floating on the lake, and then when the ice melted, they deposited the rocks right on the shoreline there. Okay, so then now let's look up from these rocks. You see some of these dead snags, the trees there that are dead. There's actually a osprey nest in the tree that's to our left there, and there could be an osprey in there. I'm not sure, but when you're here, you look and watch for those osprey, because when I was here the other day before, there was 3 osprey flying around this area. So I want you to observe the birds here. So we're going to look. Your observance will be flora, fauna, and the geology around here. Flora being the plant life and the fauna being the animal life around here. And then we have our geology with the rocks here. Now let's pan over to our trees over here. I'm not going to tell you the name of these trees. What I want you to do is get your plant guide out, and I want you to use your plant guide here that you've all received in your craft kits. And you're going to go through here, and of course you're in the tree section here. This is a great book because it's got trees, shrubs, wildflowers, then you get into the grasses and sedges and ferns, and even mosses and lichens, and even the aquatic life that could be that you might be able to find along the shoreline here too. So check that out also. So there are these large trees here. I want you to identify these large trees, and there's a couple more trees in this area here too. I want you to use your book to identify them. Shrubs, trees. If you want to try grasses, I know that we have some shrubs around here too that you could identify through this book here. So why don't you come down to these places with your family, enjoy the beauty of these places, the solitude. A lot of times there's not a whole lot of people down here, so come on down and do your observations and reflections of all the life forms around here. Remember the fauna, flora, and the geology.